Here is your story, 3,000 words, clean and continuous. Nara learned early that the best way to survive a palace was to become part of the walls. Not invisible exactly. Walls get noticed when they crack. Walls hold things up. People lean on them without thinking. That was the job. That was the whole of it. She had been brought to the Ashvale Pact 3 years ago under terms she did not negotiate and could not refuse. The men who had raised her owed a debt too large for money. She was the next available currency. The terms were clear. She signed where they told her to sign and she packed one bag and she did not look back at the house because looking back at things that cannot be changed is a waste of energy she had never been able to afford. The laundry quarters were cold. The stone floor held the cold the way stone always does, deeply, personally, like it had decided on the cold and was not going to be argued out of it. She was given a room the size of a large closet and a job sorting linen and a list of rules she memorized in one evening. She was not unhappy. Unhappy was also a waste. She was simply there, doing the work, learning which robe belonged to which attendant, learning the difference between the alpha's household garments and the council members, learning how to get bloodstains out of wool without shrinking the fibers. She was, by the end of her first year, the best laundress in the Ashvale Pack. She was, by the end of her second, the head of the laundry quarters. She was, on the morning this story begins, standing 3 rungs up a wooden ladder cataloging the week's linen inventory when a robe landed on her face. She did not scream. She did not fall. She peeled the fabric off her face with one hand and held the ladder with the other and looked down. King Kale stood at the base of the ladder. He was not looking up at her. He was already turning toward the door, one hand raising in a brief gesture that meant, she understood immediately, take care of it. He was tall in the way mountains are tall, not as a boast but simply as a fact of how much space he required. His shoulders carried the particular tension of someone who had been responsible for other people's lives for so long that his body had simply accepted it as its natural posture. He wore a plain gray shirt. His jaw was set. His eyes, in the half-second she saw them before he turned, were the color of deep water. He left. She looked at the robe in her hand. It was heavy, heavier than she expected, lined with something she would later identify as a silver-threaded wool that was so far above her tax bracket she almost laughed. She did not laugh. She folded it over her arm, climbed down the ladder, noted it in her inventory log, and went to work. She found the note when she was turning out the pockets. She always turned out pockets. This was not curiosity. This was professional practice learned the hard way after she ruined a lieutenant's hand-drawn map of the northern borders by running it through the wash cycle. That had been her 3rd week. She had stood in front of a very large, very unhappy man and said, I should have checked the pockets. I'll replace the map. He had stared at her. She had met the stare. He had, inexplicably, never given her trouble after that. So she turned out every pocket. Always. The folded square of paper hit the stone floor and she picked it up before she had time to decide whether to. She unfolded it. The handwriting was loose and uneven, nothing like the formal script on palace documents. It looked like someone had been writing quickly, or emotionally, or both. Asterisk she smells like the winter section of the forest. I don't know what to do with that, asterisk. Nara stood still for a moment. Then she refolded the paper and set it on the edge of the windowsill and went back to washing the robe. Someone's private business. Not hers. She had a full day of work and 3 baskets of council robes still waiting and the water was, as always, too cold. She did not think about the note again. She thought about it constantly. She returned the robe the following morning. A junior attendant collected it from her in the corridor without making eye contact. That was normal. She was below eye contact level. She walked back to the laundry quarters, started on the week's sheets, and told herself the note belonged to someone's private life and she had already forgotten it. She had not forgotten it. The second note came 11 days later. King Kale's robe again, the same heavy one, which had apparently become a regular occurrence, as the junior attendant began delivering it to her specifically rather than leaving it in the general collection basket. She noticed this. She noted it the way she noted everything, quietly, completely, without expression. She turned out the pocket. The paper was there. She fixed the drainage pipe outside the east wing herself. With a rock and what I think was a hairpin. She didn't ask for help. She didn't know I was watching. The wolf hasn't stopped thinking about it since. Nara read it twice. Then she put it with the first note, which she had moved from the windowsill to the small wooden box she kept under her bed because the windowsill was not a private location and she was not explaining herself to anyone. She washed the robe. She returned it. She went about her day. The third note arrived 8 days after that. She eats lunch alone. She seems to prefer it. I am going to ruin this completely. She read that one 3 times. She folded it smaller than the others. On the 4th day after the third note, she asked the senior laundress, in a tone that she designed to sound like she was asking about the weather, what the king's wolf was like. The senior laundress, a broad woman in her 50s named Etta who had been in the palace since before Nara was born and who had survived 4 different administrations through the simple method of knowing everything and saying almost none of it, went quiet. The particular quality of that quiet told Nara everything she needed to know about whether this was a topic people discussed freely. Then Etta said, low and quick, like a lovesick boy stuck in the chest of a man who would rather die than admit it. The king hates it. The wolf doesn't care. She paused. Don't go asking around about that. I won't, Nara said, and meant it. She went back to sorting linen. The cold water dripped. The pipes knocked. She thought, well. All right then, The 4th note was very short. I keep putting her name at the top of the page and then crossing it out. This doesn't help, The 5th was longer. She told the head steward he'd mislabeled the Eastern Territory records, not loudly, not to embarrass him, just quietly, correctly, with the right documents in her hand. He's twice her age and 3 times her rank and she was right and they both knew it and she just walked away after. Like it was nothing. It was not nothing, The 6th note arrived the same week as the 5th, tucked not in the outer pocket but in the inner lining of the robe, between the 2nd and 3rd button. She almost missed it. She found it only because she had by this point become very thorough about searching the robe specifically, which was information she was not sharing with anyone, including herself. She unfolded it. It said. Nara. That's all. Just, Nara. I've been trying to put more words around it and there aren't any. She read it standing at the washing basin. The water dripped. The room was very quiet. Someone down the corridor was whistling something tuneless. The cold stone held the sound the way it held everything, completely, without comment. She read the note aloud, quietly, to no one. Just her own name, in that looping undisciplined script, in the handwriting of a wolf that was apparently doing all the emotional labor that a king had decided he was too busy for. She set the note down on the edge of the basin. She picked up the robe. She smoothed the lapel. It did not need smoothing. She checked the buttons. All present. She checked the inner lining. Clean. She smoothed the lapel again. Then she folded the robe with complete precision into its proper shape and added it to the finished pile and she did not look at the note on the basin's edge for a long time. When she finally did look at it, she picked it up, folded it in the same direction as the others, and put it in the box under her bed. She lay on her bed that night and looked at the ceiling and thought, this is someone else's problem. A king and his wolf and whatever complicated war they were having with each other inside one shared body. Nothing to do with her. She was the laundress. She washed the robe. That was the job. Her name, in that handwriting. She turned onto her side. Well. All right then, He came for the robe himself on a Tuesday. This did not happen. The king of the Ashvale pack did not collect his laundry in person. There were people for that. There were whole systems for that. She had organized those systems herself. She was elbow deep in the cold wash basin when the door to the laundry room opened and something changed in the air, a shift in pressure, in weight, in the particular quality of the room's silence, and she knew before she turned around. She turned around. He stood in the doorway. Not leaning. Not casual. The doorframe happened to be where he was and so the doorframe had no choice. My robe, he said. Not finished, she said. She turned back to the basin. Her hands kept moving. This was important. Her hands kept moving. He did not leave. The silence between them had a texture to it. She had experienced many kinds of silence in 3 years of palace work, and none of them had felt like this one. This one had weight. This one was aware of itself. She heard him move, not toward her, just a shift, a redistribution of all that presence, and then he said, quietly, like he was reading something he had not meant to say aloud. "You smell like winter." Her hands stopped moving. She started them again immediately. "It's the soap," she said. "From the northern market. I can change it." A pause. The length of it rearranged the room slightly. "Don't." Then he left. She stood at the basin for a long time after the door closed. The water was cold against her arms. The linen moved slowly in the current she had stopped making. Outside, somewhere in the palace above her, life continued its normal operations: council meetings, training yards, the organized machinery of a pack running smoothly under a king who had it all perfectly under control. Her hands were completely steady. They were so steady it was its own kind of thing entirely. She finished the robe. She dried it and pressed it and checked every pocket, inner and outer, with complete thoroughness. She folded it. She added it to the finished pile. Then she sat down on the low stool beside the basin and thought for a while. She was not a girl who made decisions impulsively. She was not a girl who made decisions at all if she could avoid it. Decisions implied investment, and investment implied something to lose, and she had arrived here 3 years ago with one bag and the understanding that the terms were clear, and that was that. She had kept herself clean of losing anything extra. It was the only system that worked. She pulled a small square of paper from her inventory notebook. She found her pen. She thought about what she would write. She wrote 3 different things and crossed them all out. Then she wrote the actual thing, which was shorter than all the crossed-out versions. I know it's the wolf. I'm going to pretend it's you anyway. That's my problem, not yours, She looked at it for a moment. She folded it once. She pressed it into the inner pocket of the robe, between the 2nd and 3rd button, where she had found his smallest note. She brought the robe to the collection point herself rather than waiting for the attendant. A small irregularity. No one would notice. Or if they noticed, they would notice the way people notice walls, briefly, without filing it. She walked back through the lower corridor, past the drainage pipe on the east wing that she had fixed with a rock and a hairpin 6 weeks ago because it had been leaking onto the stone floor and making the passage slippery, and she had the tools available and it needed doing. She had not thought about it since. It had not occurred to her that anyone was watching. She went to the dining hall and ate her lunch at her usual table, the small one in the corner by the east window that got the afternoon light. She ate alone, as she always did, because she preferred the quiet and had learned to say so directly when people asked. They stopped asking after a while. She was unbothered by this. The food was warm today. That was something. She ate her lunch and watched the light on the stone floor and thought about nothing in particular, which was something she was usually good at and was today slightly less good at than usual, but she managed it. She finished her food. She brought her tray to the collection point. She went back to work. The afternoon passed the way afternoons passed. She did not see the king. She did not expect to. The robe would go through the attendant system and eventually reach his chamber, and at some point, today or tomorrow or the day after, he would reach into the inner pocket and find what she had left there, and then he would do whatever he would do, and that was not something she could manage or predict or protect herself from. She had left the note. That was the decision she had made. The rest of it was outside her hands now. She sorted the evening linen. She noted the inventory. She swept the stone floor. She banked the small heating brazier that made the room slightly less cold and then turned it off because fuel was allocated and she had used today's portion. She put on an extra layer of her own clothing instead, a thick gray cardigan that she had mended in 4 places and which was as far above the robe in terms of personal value as anything she owned. She went to her room. She ate a small dinner she had saved from lunch. She did this often, the saving, a habit from before she came here, and she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the small wooden box. She did not open it. She had the notes memorized by now. There was nothing new in there. She lay down and looked at the ceiling, and the palace settled around her, all that stone and history and weight, all those floors above her with their council rooms and their throne rooms and their complicated arrangements of power that moved like water around the shape of one man who held it all still by sheer force of presence. Her name, in that handwriting. Asterisk Nara. Just, Nara, asterisk. She closed her eyes. Outside, the night moved in over the Ashvale territory, over the training yards and the great gates and the forest that bordered the eastern wall, the part of the forest that in winter smelled like cold air and pine and something clean. The wolf knew that part of the forest. Apparently it knew her. Apparently it had been taking notes. The terms she had arrived under were still in place. She had not changed them. She had not been offered the chance to change them. She was still the head laundress. She was still 3 years into a situation she had signed without negotiating. But she had left a note. That was new. She was not going to think about it until she had to. She was going to get up tomorrow morning and walk to the laundry quarters and start the week's work and turn out every pocket thoroughly and professionally and not think about a particular inner pocket until she had to think about it. She was going to be steady. She was going to be the wall. But even walls, she knew, even the ones that held everything up, even the ones people leaned on without thinking, even those had a warm side and a cold side. One face toward the weather. One face toward the room. She had spent 3 years keeping her warm side to herself. The note was folded in a pocket now. That's my problem, not yours, she had written. She lay there in the dark and thought, maybe. Maybe it was. Maybe she had handed him a problem and it would come back to her wrong, or not at all, or in a form she hadn't prepared for. Maybe the wolf would tell the king and the king would call her to some official room and say something carefully correct and entirely distant and she would stand there and say, asterisk of course. The terms are clear, asterisk, and she would walk back down to the cold quarters and the cold water and the stone floor and add this to the list of things she did not look back at. Maybe. But she had written it. She had folded it once and pressed it into the silk lining between the second and third button, the same place she had found his. He would find it. Or he already had. The ceiling held the dark the way stone held cold, completely, without comment. She slept.